Fresh to occupy and use part in the WCA advantage. The page-turning octahedron is friendly to organize, fun to observe, and it fulfills the obligation of what even is a twisty puzzle. Some want to fight the organization, while some are caught in a race to be faster than others. Excuse me, my friend. We are far too old for this.
Before we can even make an FTO, the question is, what even is a good FTO? Let's look at what we have on the market. Since I only have one FTO on hand, I'm going to demonstrate with the 6x6. Obviously on the original field, which I didn't really try, based on what I heard, we have the Lan FTO, which was the original one, pretty bad and no longer relevant. Then there's the Rex TO, which is actually the Chi Rex cube. It basically has a shape mod relationship with the FTO. I don't know which the original or which the shape mod. You can, because it's the same mechanism inside, different shape on the outside, someone invented a set of caps that allow you to swap and turn the Rex cube into an FTO. I'm not too sure how similar or different it is from the current Chi FTO. Then there is the Shengshou FTO, which based on what I heard about it, is quite bad and also no longer relevant. Going on to the relevant ones, which is the three that I tried in the Cube Workshop. There's a Tiansheng, which I tried the V1. I know a V2 has been released. I've never tried the V2, but V1 was the original good one, and based on what I heard again, the V2 is just another budget cube. Then we have the Dayan. The Dayan is supposedly the best FTO out there, which is why I'm using the Aoshi WRM to represent it, but if you have noticed, I didn't choose the Aoshi V4, I specifically chose the WRM to represent it, and that's partly because the Dayan is the biggest sized one out of the available options. Plus, I still feel like there are a few things to be desired from the Dayan. Namely, even after trying the Dayan, I still felt that it was a little bit slow and heavy. Of course, it's faster, turns better than the other two, but I do think FTO has the ability to go even faster than that. And of course there's the Chi, which is the other budget option, reportedly more stable and less prone to pops than the Tiansheng V1, and I'm not sure the Tiansheng V2 fixed the pops, but in the end, since I already showed it on screen just now, the Chi was the one that I actually chose to buy. It's partly because I didn't want to fork out the full sum on the Dayan. The Tiansheng V2 hasn't arrived in store at the point in time, and I heard that the Chi had stronger defenses against pop compared to the Tiansheng V1. Despite that, I do think this FTO has room for improvement. I think my top two main goals is firstly to just make it faster and lighter. Okay, probably top three goals, because I also want to improve the corner cutting, and of course another thing is corner twists just seem too easy. So I probably want a way to make the corner twist a little bit harder. Okay, so the FTO is actually quite a complicated puzzle to design. It is fundamentally a two-shell puzzle, and it's the traditional definition of shells. So it's not two-shelled in the same way as the Moyi Huachuang or Gun 562. With this one, it's kind of my own addition to the definition of what is a shell. It does not mandatorily have to be two-shelled. With just the outer 5x5 shell alone, it's enough to make a 5x5, but the Huachuang takes an extra step to add an inner 3x3 underneath this 5x5, which anchors in these outer pieces and makes them a whole lot more stable. With the FTO, which actually this is the more traditional definition of what a shell puzzle is, the piece where the screw goes in is not a big piece that transcends both the inner and the outer shell. In this case, the piece where the screw goes into only belongs to the inner shell. It doesn't go to the outer shell, and instead another piece that hangs onto it, which is the edge, this secondary piece is the one that transcends from the inner to the outer shell, and then the entirety of the outer shell hooks underneath the edge, not the center. Like in this case, both shells hook under the center. Additionally, because cubes cut at right angles, is pretty easy to understand, but when it comes to the FTO, which cuts at triangle cuts, there are more invisible lines that you cannot cross. Similarly on the cube, so there's this line that cuts through the origin. It's angled at this 54.736 degree angle. If you want to know, you can look at a calculation put in another video, but anyway, what this line is actually the limit of the outer layer. So anything that crosses this line, it would cut the cube in extra ways that you normally wouldn't think of. Like the most common example is at the very tip of this outer layer where it intersects the outside. This small line here is 1 out of 6.83 of the entire cube size. That's why if you cross this line, which will happen if you try to make the outer layer exactly 1/7, then you end up with more extra cuts that would detach the corner head from the remainder of the cube, which is why this cube actually cheated a little bit. So going back to the FTO, there are also some cut lines, like invisible forbidden lines that I'm not aware of. So even though I kind of drew the mechanism correctly at first, I did not manage to get pieces of a functional FTO. Like the edge piece was like totally detached, and I don't even know how they route into the cube at all. So I have to make a confession here. I actually went to look up some FTO designs in Onshape, like some public designs, and then I kind of angled my cut line. Like the part where it cuts backwards here actually becomes detached, and it becomes its own triangle piece. There are actually multiple floating inner triangles caused by like intersections at triangular angles instead of like right angles. And this triangle here is actually not the same piece as the piece below. I can in fact isolate the piece. It's not the centerpiece. It's its own floating internal triangle piece, which if you remember the 大雁 FTO, it actually kept this piece in and even put a magnet on this piece to attract the centerpiece below. And this is the centerpiece of the raw cuts. So this is my first attempt at the FTO core. I haven't printed the triangles and the corners yet. This is just the core, the centers, and all the edges. Unfortunately, I'm quite disappointed with how this turned out. Like the print quality of the edges is fine, but because I used the 0.2 nozzle, but I do think that's the main thing I don't like about this is it pops way too easily. So just turning this will cause this piece to fly out, which is kind of against my whole design philosophy because I purposely put like double anchors on this thing, and it fits underneath like the center stock stem and the lower part of the stem. So actually with this concept, I actually use two magnets of different sizes. There's a big magnet that goes on the top here, and it's a smaller magnet that goes below. That's how this FTO gets maglev. And then the two anchors are supposed to sit below, but the problem is not how many anchors there are, but the size of the individual anchors. They are really, really short, and the surface area which this edge sits underneath this center is just way too small, and I think that's what's causing all the problems. Which, yeah, even trying to put one piece back in and another piece just pops out like that. In addition to that, the turning is just really rough. Although rough turning, it could kind of be excused, but I do think there's something wrong with the print orientation of the centers, because I actually printed each center like standing up like that on one side of a triangle, but as you notice, one of the faces that which is at the bottom, it actually has support material underneath, because it's actually not, this is not a flat face, this is meant to be a very, very gentle curve, and because of that the support material is underneath to print the overhang, and when I rip the support material out, there's just way too much residue in there, which I do think affected the quality of the turning. So my current plan now is to go back to the drawing board again, firstly make this harder to pop, and also try a different print orientation to minimize all those leftover residue.
Maglev is a strategy used to make a twisty puzzle faster than ordinary. Instead of a spring which has to touch a centerpiece below and the screw on top, a pair of ring magnets is used to float them over. This creates a frictionless turning orbit. Additionally, Maglev has a non-linear force-to-object displacement relationship, exerting less force when everything is aligned, but more force when you corner cut and push the centers upward. This practically makes the puzzle faster and more stable.
This is the second attempt at the FTO core, or more like the inner shell. Right away the turning is a lot better than my first attempts. Okay, there's still a little bit of catching because there's a bit of wiggle room and the piece can actually go out of place. I don't see this being an issue if, like, let's say the triangles and the corner pieces are filled up and the edges has less room to wiggle around. I do think this issue will get resolved. And just by yanking the piece like that, okay, maybe I can still get it out, but let's put it in between two centers. Yep, it doesn't fly out. When one edge is in between two centers, it doesn't easily get yanked out. It's more like when it goes in between. But in the full puzzle, there would have been a triangle piece here. So I will see how difficult it is to pop. But right away, this is just much more stable than before. The new design on the left, old design on the right. Yes, with the old design, I put the double anchor. It looks really small. The new design, I turned it into spherical. I made the anchor much bigger, and you can kind of see the difference in sizes. And I basically turned the inner shell into a Weilong. you can see that this is the normal head of the Weilong, then there's a center skirt area, and then it digs under this. And if you just look at this piece of the side and ignore the head, just look at the bottom part here, it really looks like a Weilong edge. So I'm currently in the process of printing the caps. But one thing I found is that when making a turn halfway, especially if I try the finger trick, it actually almost always locks up halfway through the turn. And I suspect, or originally I suspected it was due to the triangles being able to wobble, and this one moves up a little bit and catches on the other one. And I've tried printing some of these inner triangle pieces that they actually fit on top here like that. But those don't stay in place and they tend to dislodge and cause even more catches. So upon further investigation, I don't think the triangles were the cause, and even if they are, the puzzle is round enough to corner cut through them. But instead, let's just do a move, and okay, notice where it gets stuck. I can move all these other pieces here, but notice that the edge are the ones that I can't drag. So I do suspect that the catching is due to the edge. Or what I think is going on is actually I rounded off the center pieces too much, because I've taken a few pieces out here so I can show on this side. This edge is sitting directly on the center piece like that, but when I turn it 45 degrees like this, because the center piece is rounded, it cuts off here and the neighboring piece cuts off here, so the foot of the edge is not sitting under anything here, whereas on the other side there's a center piece that is exerting a force on it, so it causes the piece to tilt. And I think that's what's the tilt in this piece is the one that causes the triangles to turn out of place and cause it to catch. So I might want to try reprinting a new set of center pieces that are less round and see whether the catching reduces. So this is the centerpiece design version 3. Compared with version 2, it's actually physically the same cut line, but going from the top view, you'll notice I've rounded the tips significantly less, so it actually extends far longer than how far version 2 extends, and hopefully the edge will be able to stabilize over a wider area and not tilt at all.
First, the obvious. FTO has a different color scheme. Have you made preparations for that, my friend? Well, let's do 5, 2, 1, 5 colors of PLA, 2 colors of PETG, and 1 missing color. We still have a Creality PLA blue, which is a much lighter shade than the Bamboo Lab blue. Perhaps we can flip the options and treat the darker blue as a purple.
Finally presenting to you the Maglev FTO. It's a little bit weird because, like, especially when I print this shade of blue next to this green, because I use the Bamboo Labs blue as my standard blue and I'll print it opposite of green. But in this case, I use the darker blue to function as a purple, and the lighter blue, which is the Creality blue, to function as the... If you know how the color spectrum works, blue is slightly more towards the green side, this blue is slightly towards the purple side, and of course the black and grey. It's actually already done before in some mega mixers where black caps are offered to swap out the grey side. As for the actual performance, sadly it's still a little bit disappointing, but I'll go through the good parts first. It's actually faster and lighter than the 3E. I kind of feel like the 3E and even the Taiyan feels a little bit more on the heavier and more dense side, which to some degree it might be inevitable considering how the mechanism works, because like it's mandatorily a 2-shell cube and you just have to lock into an inner shell, so you kind of have more pieces than it appears to be on the outside. And then of course when I put Maglev in it, it's going to be even heavier. Kind of try to compensate for the Maglev by making all the pieces have a very, like, basically very thin plastic so that the puzzle is as light as possible. Plus Maglev, although it's heavier, it's also faster because, like, for reasons I already explained, it's less friction, plus the force compression ratio is, you make the cube faster. So when it comes to corner cutting, this FTO is pretty nice as well. I do think forward is not much difference from the Chi, but reverse, yes, I put bigger Florian holes, so it kind of wins over some of the mass-produced puzzles there. So the corner twist can kind of still happen, although I do think the effort needed to twist the corners feels roughly the same as the Chi, although it might be due to the tension of this puzzle. She designed the corner to be very round underneath, and I squared it off at the tip. But the thing is, the squared off tips are contributed purely from the caps. The piece itself is designed to be super round, like, so when I was making this puzzle in an earlier stage, like before gluing on the caps, it was actually extremely easy to corner twist. And once I glued on this squared off caps to finish off the piece, the corner twist became significantly harder. So the squared off tips actually do make a difference. It's just that I would say I started from a lower baseline, so I end up at the same like corner twist difficulty as the Chi. As for magnets, this goes with the same magnet layout as the Chi. So with some of the other FTOs, in particular, I would say Tiansheng and Taoyan, I think they have multiple magnet circuits, but they included one magnet circuit between triangle and edge. But the problem with doing so is that when you turn the puzzle halfway, the triangle actually meets up with the edge again, even though it's not your intended stop destination, and this would sometimes cause an attraction in the mid-turn. The Chi, I have a feeling that this puzzle is actually designed to avoid that, and they stuck to purely just corner to triangle magnets, which only causes a magnet it only causes a magnetic attraction in your intended destination. However, with the Chi, I felt like the magnet click is a little bit too hard. Whereas with my puzzle, let me assemble it back. Magnet clicks they sound pretty loud, but the snap doesn't feel as hard. And the sound is probably more due to certain pieces being a bit more loose and rattling in place. Okay, which I'll talk more when I go over the negative things about this puzzle. And yeah, another nice thing is I can kind of feel the ball core. The Chi FTO does not come that with a ball core, this one does. And overall, yes, I do think this is quite a lightweight and fast feeling puzzle. However, yeah, going into what I don't like about it, it's just really unstable. Sure, it snaps in place pretty well, but I do find that especially the triangles, they're still really loose. So with the increased, like with the version 3 centerpiece that I made, I have completely eliminated the edge tilting issue, and actually doing vertical slices on this FTO is no problem. However, doing the U and U prime finger tricks are still a little bit unreliable, and like the triangles can still wobble just enough to like cause catches mid-turn like that. So overall, I would say the timings I get on this are probably slightly worse than what I got on the Chi FTO. So yes, I did not succeed in making a really like optimal top level speed FTO. I don't think I'm going to beat the Taoyan with this, but of course there are some lessons to be learned from this that can further improve FTO in the future. Namely, I do think that there's a reason why Taoyan and the Tiansheng FTOs went to magnetize a triangle to the edge. Because if you think about it, even though I would say the Chi is okay because the piece fitting is much tighter, whereas here I have to rely on the precision of 3D printing. Although I would say the 0.2 nozzle is an improvement over the 0.4, but still I do find that the corners and the triangles especially, they are the two furthest piece types from the core, because even though this is a double shell cube, it's not done in the same way as like the Huachong, in the sense where it's all the same piece. Like the centers belong to the first shell, and then the second shell is purely hanging on the edges. So the edges are like sort of like the anchor points, and then the further you are from the edges, the more unstable the piece is, and that's precisely the triangle in the corner. I've kind of experienced this problem in some of my past puzzles, where like the further you are from the anchor piece, so in this case the center is the anchor, then the edge, and then the corner is the furthest. When I turn the outer layer, it like when you magnetize the pieces, you know, the problem is when you magnetize the most unstable pieces that are furthest away from the core, and I experienced this more with the 3D printed puzzles and less with the mass-produced puzzles, is that when you magnetize only the unstable pieces, if the magnets are too strong and you turn an outer layer, like it tends to pull the neighboring piece along with it. Like the outer magnet will pull the second magnet. I kind of reduced this issue with some of my later puzzles. So puzzles like the Lie 762 and even the 963, like I went to use a weaker magnet on the outer layer, or more likely I used the same magnet strength for all the inners and then purposely made the outer weaker so that when I do like outer layer turns, the inners just stay like a brick. Okay, I can still feel a little bit of wobbling on this one, but certainly more stable than like if I had used the same strength everywhere. The FTO sort of made the problem worse because it's an outer magnetization with no inner magnetization at all, and also the ball core here is kind of a problem because the ball core is to the edge, it doesn't reach the corner. At least with a cube, the corner is the furthest piece, but when you do corner magnetization, the corner is actually attracted to the core, so it adds to the stability. Whereas with the FTO, the edge is the one that is attracted to the ball core and not the corner. And because of that, like, there's no extra stability added to the furthest point, and I do find that the wobbling is a bit worse. A bit closer here, the corner actually does overlap on top of the edge. So instead of a ball core, I think another possible way this could turn out is the corner foot to the edge wing magnetization, which will help to pull the corner to a more like stabilized position. So here is an even deeper look at the mechanism. You can kind of see the double Wei-Long structure here. You can see it bulges out here and it cuts underneath this part of the edge. The outer shell is the same as always, and it has this bulge that comes out here and it cuts underneath this point here. So if it's like that, then of course it's the same bulge because it's the same cut line on the triangle. You can see on the side it cuts underneath the corner here. And yeah, going in closer, you can kind of see the ball core. It tracks directly to the edge. And the centerpiece is also built to be a little bit bigger, so there's enough space to put 2 ring magnets inside. So the V1 centerpiece that I did uses a big magnet on top and a small one below, so I can make it T-shaped. But with the V2 and V3, I just made the whole thing flat, so now it has 2 big ring magnets inside instead of 1 big and 1 small. It's overall quite a stable design. The edges are actually stuck in here. They don't even wobble and tilt anymore. The main issue is just that the triangles have nothing holding on to them.
But overall, it was fun trying out a non-cubic puzzle to 3D prints, especially the FTO, which is a hot topic since it just got added to the list of WCA events. So we would like to invite you to be fast to obliterate that like button over there.